Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone. In this video, we are going to cover all the key concepts of paper 1 coordinate geometry of A-level maths, except equation of circle. I'll do that in another video. But apart from equation of circle, everything all the key concepts of coordinate geometry are going to be included in this particular session, inshallah. All right, so let's begin. So what is coordinate geometry? Coordinate geometry is the study of points on a Cartesian plane and different shapes that you can make using those points. For example, straight lines. We will see how to find equations of straight lines, solving simultaneous equations, and other related stuff. Okay, so let's begin. Let's say we have 2 points on a plane like this. So first of all, you need to know some basics that you already know from O-levels. So we will quickly review them because you'll be needing them in A-levels again as well. So let's say you've got 2 points. You've got a point A, we've got a point B. We have these 2 points. What you want to do first is you want to find the distance between those 2 points. Okay, the distance between 2 points, we kaise find karte hain? We've got this formula for that. And it looks like this. x2 minus x1 whole square plus y2 minus y1 whole square. आप किसी भी एक पॉइंट को x1 y1 कह दो, किसी दूसरे पॉइंट को आप x2 y2 कह दो. You just input values in this. For example, in this case, we say x1 is -3, y1 is 4, and similarly x2 and y2. You just input values in this formula, and you find the distance between those 2 points. Okay, you've done this in O-levels. That's the first thing that you need to know about. Then you need to know about the gradient of the line joining 2 points. Okay, so this is the formula for gradient of the line joining 2 points, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, gradient ke, you'll see different names being used. For example, you'll see this word slope being used for the gradient as well. Essentially, gradient aapko kya bata raha hota hai? Gradient tells you the direction of a line. Okay, you can call this change in y over change in x. You can call this rise or run. You're familiar with all those different things. Gradient kaise find karte hain? y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So again, you've got those 2 points A and B. You call any one of them x1 y1 and the other x2 y2. और फिर आपने सिर्फ values input करनी है उसके अंदर. For example, y2 here is 1, y1 is 4. So we have 1 minus 4 divided by x2 minus x1. Keep in mind, अगर आपको उसका negative number होगा उसका हमें brackets के अंदर डालना है इस तरह से ताकि वो bracket जब evaluate हो. For example, in this case, this becomes 4 plus 3 in the denominator. Right? So be careful about that. And you just evaluate that, you get the gradient of the line. And that tells you the direction of the line, right? So gradient aapko direction bata raha hota hai kisi line ki. Okay, now gradient, they can basically be many different possibilities when it comes to gradient. For example, you can have positive gradient, you can have a negative gradient. When do you get positive gradient? Positive gradient aapko tab hota hai jab if you go from left to right in a line, your line is going up. For example, these first 2 lines that you see on the left side, both of these have positive gradients. Why? Because as we go from left to right, the graph is going up. The y values are increasing. इस case के अंदर हमारा gradient जो होता है वो positive होता है, right? Left to right आप ऊपर की तरफ जा रहे हो. When you're going downwards, as you go from left to right, for example, in this case, or in this case, the line is going down as you go from left to right. This is the case when you have a negative gradient, right? Aapki y values decrease kar rahi hain as the x values increase. So the gradient is negative here. The third possibility is that the gradient is 0. That happens when you have horizontal lines like this. Because agar horizontal line ho, to aap dekhein, the y coordinate does not change. Gradient formula ke andar y coordinate agar change nahi hoga, numerator mein 0 aa jayega, and the gradient becomes 0. So for horizontal lines have 0 gradient. Okay, so that's the third possibility. The fourth possibility is we see what happens when we've got vertical lines. जब vertical lines होती हैं, so the fourth possibility is what happens when you've got vertical lines. अगर उसको vertical line हो, तो उसमें देखें x coordinate does not change. X coordinate remains the same at all points. Since x does not change and the gradient formula has x2 minus x1 in the denominator, the denominator mein aapke paas 0 aa jata hai. When you get 0 in the denominator, we know division by 0 is not possible mathematically, so gradient becomes undefined. So vertical lines of gradient jo hota hai wo undefined hota hai. We've got 4 possibilities for gradients here: positive gradient, negative gradient, 0 gradient, or undefined gradient. Okay, so these are the four possibilities that we have. Acha, iske saath, before we move on, we also have another formula that we have, and that is for finding the midpoint of 2 points. So let's say we've got 2 points, we've got a point A, we've got another point B. How do you find the midpoint of these points? You have got this formula x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. Again, किसी को भी आप x1 y1 कह दो, किसी को आप दूसरे point को x2 y2 कह दो. You input values and you find the midpoint from that. For example, the midpoint of these A and B points, if you use this formula, x1 की जगह -3 input कर दिया, x2 की जगह 4 input कर दिया, and similarly y1 y2 are replaced by 4 and 1. You input those values, you get this point 0.5 and 2.5. This point will be the midpoint of the line joining A and B. So if you go back to this this Cartesian plane, 0.5 and 2.5, that point is going to be somewhere here. This point is the midpoint of A and B. It's right in the middle of A and B. Okay, so midpoint का हमारे पास ये formula होता है x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. Okay, अच्छा, so we talked about gradient before. Gradient से related हमारे पास एक concept होता है that's called parallel lines. Okay, parallel lines क्या होती हैं? Parallel lines are two lines that have the same direction, right? They're going in the same direction. For example, these two lines that you see here, they have the same direction. Parallel lines के case के अंदर क्या होता है? The gradient is equal, right? The gradient of parallel lines is equal. Again, because gradient क्या represent कर रहा होता था? Gradient used to represent direction of a line. If the direction of the line is same, the gradients are equal. Okay, parallel lines and gradients equal होते हैं. Then you have perpendicular lines. Perpendicular lines are lines that have an angle of 90 degrees between them. Right, so you've got line L1 here. Let's say we've got another line L2. These two lines are perpendicular to each other. Perpendicular lines में क्या होता है? If we call the gradient of one line M1 and the gradient of the other line M2, the product of those two gradients is always equal to -1. M1 into M2 is equal to -1. Or there's another form for this. M1 equals -1 over M2. इसको अगर rearrange कर लें, you get this relationship. And from that, what you understand is gradient of perpendicular lines are negative reciprocals of each other. Gradients of perpendicular lines are negative reciprocals of each other. Now, this is an important result because that will help you write down the gradient of perpendicular lines pretty quickly. Negative का मतलब है जो आपके पास अगर एक gradient है, दूसरे gradient का sign से different होगा, आपने sign change कर देना है. Reciprocal का मतलब है उसका आपने reciprocal लेना है. For instance, let's take some examples. Let's say you've got a line that has gradient of 2. उसका जो perpendicular होगा, उसका gradient क्या होगा? You change the sign. So it was positive earlier, it becomes negative. Okay, and you take reciprocal of 2. So it's 1 over 2. -1 over 2 is the gradient of this perpendicular line. Similarly, if you've got a line that has gradient -4, उसके perpendicular gradient क्या होगा? You change the sign, negative को positive कर देंगे, and you also take the reciprocal. 4 reciprocal is 1 over 4. Similarly, we've got some other examples here. Let's say got -1 over 4. -1 over 4 का perpendicular एक line का gradient -1 over 4 है. The gradient of its perpendicular is going to be 4 because we change the sign and we take the reciprocal. Okay, so एक gradient आपको पता हो, दूसरे gradient आप निकाल सकते हो using this relationship. Okay, now the next thing is, how do you find equation of a straight line? Straight line की equation कैसे find करते हैं? Now, equation of a straight line की हमारे पास एक standard form होती है that you know again from your O levels. Y equals mx plus c. ठीक है, इसमें m क्या represent कर रहा होता है? M represents the gradient of the line. C represents the y-intercept. So if you can find the gradient of a line and the y-intercept of the line, you can find the equation of that line. ठीक है, so y-intercept क्या होता है? It's the point where the line cuts the y-axis. Okay. अच्छा. So let's take an example. Let's say you've got that you've got 2 points. For instance, 8 minus 4. This is the one point that you have. You have another point that is 0 and 2. You want to find the equation of the line that is passing through these 2 points, and that's this line here. Okay. So what can you do for this? You can find the gradient using the gradient formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. हमने एक gradient find कर लिया यहाँ पे. This gradient turned out to be -3/4. ठीक है? अच्छा, then you look for the y-intercept. आपको एक point पता है 0, 2, और ये x coordinate 0 है. That means that's the y-intercept. The y-intercept is 2 here because that's the point where the line is crossing the y-axis. You've got the y-intercept. You've got the gradient. आपको सिर्फ क्या करना है, उसके अंदर values input कर देनी है. Gradient is -3/4. The y-intercept is 2, so c is 2 and m is equal to -3/4. You just input these values in the formula y equals mx plus c and you get your equation, right? So y equals mx plus c के अंदर m की जगह -3/4 डाल दिया, c की जगह 2 डाल दिया. You get the equation of that line. Now this is one way to find equation of a line. In A levels, there's another form that you will be using much more often, and that's called the gradient point form. This is much quicker when you have when you do not have the y-intercept given. ठीक है, जो y-intercept नहीं given होता, this form is much quicker. इसको directly equation of a line find कर सकते हो. So what does it look like? It's basically y minus y1 equals m into x minus x1. Again, m here represents the gradient like before, but x1 y1, this now represents a point lying on the line. So you need two things for this. You need a point lying on the line, any point. It doesn't have to be the y-intercept anymore. It could be any point on the line. And the second thing that you need is the gradient of the line. ठीक है, आपको ये दो चीजें चाहिए होंगी. Let's take an example. Let's say you've got a line that has gradient -4, and you've got a point that lies on the line. आपके पास एक point A3, which is 3 minus 6. What you can do is you can say gradient is -4. आपको उसने दिया हुआ है, so -4 is basically the value of m. 3 minus 6. These are x1 and y1. You've got this form. You've got this form, which is y minus y1 equals m into x minus x1. इसके अंदर values input कर दे. In place of y1, you input -6. In place of m, you input -4. And in place of x1, you input 3. आपने values input कर दी. You can actually just leave the equation in this form if you want. This is generally enough. अगर उसने आप सिर्फ equation पूछी है line की और उसने किसी form में करने को नहीं कहा, you can actually just leave it at this point and that will be fine. But if you want to simplify, आप उसको rearrange करके इस form में लिख दोगे, जो आपकी standard form होती है y equals mx plus c, and you get the equation of the line in that form. So this is another form that we often use to find equation of a line. So the takeaway from there is the conclusion from that is you've got two forms that you can use to find equation of a line, y equals mx plus c and y minus y1 equals m into x minus x1. When do you use the first form? You use the first form when you know the y-intercept. When you know the y-intercept, then using the first form is much quicker. However, if you do not know the y-intercept, you should prefer the second form because that's going to be quicker. Although you can use the first form in this case as well, but the second form इसमें ज़्यादा quicker होगी. Okay? So आपको क्या चाहिए इसके लिए? Gradient चाहिए. आपके पास ये भी हो सकता है कि आपके पास एक point given हो, दो points given है. You've got the coordinates of point A and B. ठीक है? You've got these 2 points. You do not have the gradient given. So what you can do in this case is you can find the gradient first. Gradient आप खुद से निकाल लोगे पहले. M की value निकाल लोगे. x1, y1 could be then any one of these 2 points. किसी भी एक point को आप x1, y1 assume कर लो और उसके अंदर input कर दो. You'll find the equation of the line. Okay, so that's how you find the equation of the line. So then you'll be dealing with simultaneous equations. You've solved them in O levels as well. So how do you solve simultaneous equations? You've got multiple methods for them. You know about them. For example, elimination, substitution. You know about those two methods. So you can use any of them, or we often do it like this as well. We make the same variable the subject in both equations. For example, we've got this equation, 2x plus y equals 10, and we've got another equation which is x plus y equals 7. अब दोनों में से एक ही वेरिएबल को सब्जेक्ट बना दे. For example, you can make y the subject in both of them. You get y equals 10 minus 2x here, and you get y equals 7 minus x here. You've got the same variable the subject in both of them. Now you just equate both of them. दोनों को equate करके आपके पास x की वैल्यू आ जाएगी. वापस input कर दें किसी भी एक equation के अंदर, you'll get the corresponding value of y as well, right? So you know how to solve simultaneous equations already. हमने quadratics में भी discuss किया था. We often use this method here, that we make the same variable the subject in both equations, and then we just equate both of them. Now, what do these values of x and y represent here? 3 and 4. This is basically these are basically the coordinates of the point of intersection. 3 and 4 here are the coordinates of the point of intersection of these two lines. 2x plus y equals 10 or x plus y equals 7. You do lines. The point of intersection is 3, 4. So you can see that on the graph here. 2x plus y equals 10 line hai or x plus y equals 7 line hai. The point of intersection here is 3, 4, and that's what we found there by solving simultaneous equations. So whenever you have to find the point or points of intersection of two graphs, whether they're both linear, whether one is a curve and the other is a line, whenever you're looking for points of intersection, you solve those equations simultaneously, okay? And you'll get the points of intersection from that. Okay, then sometimes you have to find the gradient of a line when you have the equation of the line given. How do you do that? Remember, the standard form of the equation of a line is y equals mx plus c. So let's say you've got this equation given, y equals minus 2x plus 4. How do you find the gradient of this line? You just compare with the standard form. X के साथ जो number है हमारे पास, that's basically m. So यहाँ पे x के साथ we've got minus 2. So gradient here is going to be negative 2. You can also find the y-intercept here if you want. C corresponds to 4 here. So y-intercept would be 4 if we needed that, right? Now, in this case, we had the equation exactly in the form that we required it to be in. But it's not going to be the case always. For example, you could have an equation like this, 2x plus 4y equals 9. And you want to find the gradient of this line. How do you find the gradient of this line now? आपको क्या करना पड़ेगा? You'll first have to convert it to standard form. Y equals mx plus c वाली form में इसको पहले convert करना पड़ेगा. You will need y as the subject there. You need to make y the subject. How do you do that? You know how to do that. Y को subject बना लेंगे, right? So you take y on one side and take all the other terms on the other side. फिर आप end पे जाके 4 से divide भी कर दोगे. When you do that, eventually you get this standard form, okay? And then you compare it with y equals mx plus c, and you see कि अच्छा x के साथ number कौन सा multiply हो रहा है? It's minus 1 over 2 here. So gradient turns out to be negative 1 over 2. So whenever you have to find the gradient of a line given its equation, आप उसको क्या करोगे? उसको y equals mx plus c form में convert कर लोगे पहले. And then whatever is the coefficient of x, that's going to be the gradient, okay? All right. Now, this is something that we have to do quite often. Let's say you've got a line, and on that line, you've got 2 points, A and B. And in fact, you've got 3 points, A, B, and C. Okay? You know the coordinates of A, you know the coordinates of B, but you do not know the coordinates of C, and that's what you're looking for. आपको C के coordinates चाहिए, given that you know B is the midpoint of AC. How do you find that? You just say coordinates of B are equal to the midpoint of AC. So you can use the midpoint formula for this. अब क्या करो? आपको पता है B के coordinates क्या हैं? There are 6 and 5. You equate them to the midpoint of AC. So the trick here is you assume the coordinates of C to be A and B. C के coordinates को आपने assume कर लिया that they are A and B. Okay, so we assume the coordinates of C to be A and B, and then you find the midpoint of AC using the midpoint formula. So we've got 0 plus A over 2 for the x coordinate, 2 plus B over 2 for the y coordinate, and we equate that to the coordinates of B. So we equate corresponding values here. 0 plus A equals 6 and 5 equals 2 plus B over 2. We find the values of A and B from there, and these are going to be the coordinates of C. So when you have a situation like this, when you know the midpoint of 2 points, or आपको एक point side वाला पता है, दूसरा point आपको find करना है, you can use the midpoint formula like this. There's another way of doing this. Let's say we've got the same situation as before. You've got this point given, that's the point A. You've got this point B given, and you want to find the coordinates of C. You can use the vector method for this as well. And the idea there is, since B is halfway between A and C, you look for how much you have to go horizontally in order to go from A to B. You have to go 6 units for that. So utna hi aage chale jaoge, or you go 6 units more, right? So you can write it like right in this form as I did here. So I started by writing the coordinates of A and B, which are 0, 2 and 6, 5. Okay, 0, 2, and 6, 5. These are the coordinates of A and B. Now, what are we doing after that? So you can just go through the process very quickly. So how do you go from 0 to 6? 0 to 6 पे जाने के लिए you have to add 6. X coordinate आपको 6 add करना पड़ रहा है. How do you get to C after that? You add 6 more. अब इसमें 6 और add कर दो. You will get 12 from that. Right? Similarly, vertically आपको क्या करना पड़ रहा था? A से B पे जाने के लिए. A से B पे जाने के लिए you had to go 3 units upwards. You were going from 2 to 5. You had to go 3 units upwards, right? So how much more do you have to go? Since B was midway between A and C, you have to go 3 units more. So here on the right side, what you can say is, how do you go from 2 to 5? You add 3. So you have to add 3 more to get to C. So 5 plus 3 आपके पास क्या हो जाएगा? 8 हो जाएगा. These are the coordinates of C. Okay, so you can use the vector method like this as well. You can use the vector method is pretty helpful in situations like these as well. So let's say you've got this parallelogram given ABCD that you see on the left side. You're given the coordinates of B, A, and D, but you want to find the coordinates of C. So you can use this idea since it's a parallelogram. A and B, AD in fact, this line AD and the line BC, they're parallel and equal in length, right? So you can say they're equal vectors, right? So A से D पे जाने के लिए भी आपको उतने ही units right और upward जाना पड़ेगा जितना आपको B से C पे जाने के लिए जाना पड़ेगा, right? So what you can do is you can use this idea कि how can you go from A to the point D? A से D पे हम कैसे जा सकते हैं? So A से D पे जाने के लिए, you see, you have to go from -8 to 6. How do you go from -8 to 6? You have to add 14 for that. How do you go from 0 to 2 vertically? You have to add 2 for that. So how do you go from B to C then? B से C पे जाने के लिए आपको यही करना पड़ेगा because these two lines are parallel and equal. तो B से C पे जाने के लिए भी you add 14 to the x coordinate, that gives you 16, and you add 2 to the y coordinate, and that gives you 12. So that's how you find the coordinates of the point C there. Okay, all right. Achha, now a lot of times you get questions in coordinate geometry that involves some shapes, some of these common shapes, and they come very frequently. The first few are more common, but you also see the ones at the bottom. So you need to understand the properties of the diagonals of these shapes, right? Because you often have to use them. Now, there are 3 things that you have to know about them. The first is the midpoint of the diagonals, right? So for a square, for instance, the diagonals meet at the midpoint, right? So this point O at the center, this point O at the center, this is actually the midpoint of both the diagonals. So both diagonals have the same midpoint in case of a square. And both the diagonals are also perpendicular to each other. Now, these are important properties that you sometimes have to use. Square ke andar kya hota hai? The midpoints are the same for both diagonals. मतलब एक ही point of intersection होता है, वो दोनों diagonals का midpoint होता है. And the diagonals are also perpendicular to each other. और square के अंदर diagonals equal भी होते हैं. They're also equal. Although equality वाली property इतनी ज़्यादा use नहीं होती है, but square के अंदर आपके diagonals equal भी होते हैं. ठीक है? Now, let's talk about these properties for all of these 6 figures that we've got. We've got these 6 common figures: square, rhombus, rectangle, parallelogram, kite, and a trapezium. ठीक है? अब midpoints same किस के अंदर होते हैं? Midpoints are the same in case of the first 4 figures. Square के अंदर, rhombus के अंदर, rectangle और parallelogram के अंदर जो diagonals के midpoints होते हैं, they are equal. They are the same. Both diagonals have the same midpoints, right? And in the first 2 of those shapes, in a square and a rhombus, the diagonals are perpendicular. To each other. It's a property that's used very, very frequently. Another way to say the same thing is, since they have both of these things here, they have the same midpoint in case of a square and a rhombus, and they're also perpendicular. You can also say, and this helps a lot of times, diagonals in a square, we can say diagonals of a square and also of a rhombus, they are perpendicular. They are perpendicular bisectors of each other. Okay, diagonals of a square and a rhombus are perpendicular bisectors of each other because unka midpoint bhi same hota hai and they are also perpendicular to each other, right? Kite ke andar bhi, you have to remember the diagonals are perpendicular, although they do not meet at the same midpoint. Unka midpoint same nahi hota, lekin they are still perpendicular. Okay, you can look at the other properties here, but these are the more common ones that you have to use pretty often. अच्छा, rectangle के अंदर, remember rectangle और parallelogram के अंदर the diagonals are not perpendicular, so you have to keep that in mind as well. Rectangle के अंदर और parallelogram के अंदर diagonals perpendicular नहीं होते generally. Okay, अच्छा. Next, we have equation of a perpendicular bisector. How do you find equation of a perpendicular bisector? Perpendicular bisector hota kya hai? Perpendicular means the angle is 90 degrees, right? The angle between the lines is 90 degrees. Bisector means उस line को half में cut करता है. So let's take an example. Let's say you've got 2 points, A and B, and you want to find the equation of the perpendicular bisector of these two, of the line joining these 2 points. तो क्या मतलब आपको एक ऐसी line की equation find करनी है that passes through the midpoint of A and B. So let's call this midpoint M, and it's also perpendicular to AB. इसकी equation find करनी है. How do you find that? Remember, equation find करने के लिए हमें दो चीजें चाहिए होती हैं. We need the gradient and we need any one point on the line. So point क्या हमें कैसे मिल जाएगा? Point is M. So we can find the midpoint of AB. That will be one point that we need. So AB का midpoint find कर लेंगे. And the second thing that we need is the gradient of that line of this perpendicular bisector. How do you find the gradient of the perpendicular bisector? For that, what we can do is we can find the gradient of AB. AB का gradient निकाल लिया. So we find the gradient of AB here. And then what we do is we take the negative reciprocal of that, because remember, perpendicular lines के gradients जो होते हैं वो negative reciprocals होते हैं एक दूसरे के. So once we have this gradient 1/2, the gradient of its perpendicular is going to be -2. We change the sign and take reciprocal. So now we've got the gradient. We've got the gradient and also a point lying on the line. We use this form that's y minus y1 equals m into x minus x1. इसके अंदर values input कर देंगे and you'll get the equation of the perpendicular bisector. Okay, so that's how you find the equation of the perpendicular bisector of the line joining 2 points. So then this comes up sometimes that you have to find area of a triangle and you have the coordinates given. या आप उसको draw करके आप देख सकते हो, sketch करके आप देख सकते हो वो किस तरह के लगता है. Now, a lot of times, in fact, most of the times, the problems that you get like this, they will have at least one side that is either horizontal or vertical, right? That's, you can say 90% of the cases, or even more than that. You'll have one side that is either vertical or horizontal. For example, in this case, you've got the side that is vertical. So whenever you find any one such side, you will take that as the base. आपको कोई vertical side मिल जाए या horizontal side मिल जाए, आपने उसको base ले लेना, ठीक है? So in this case, we call this side, we take this side as the base. We've got these coordinates, you can see them. We've got the coordinates of the point A, we've got the coordinates of the point B, we've got the coordinates of the point C. What we are interested in is the area of this triangle ABC. तो हमने क्या किया? Whichever side was either horizontal or vertical, in this case में अंदर horizontal तो कोई भी line नहीं थी, vertical है, इसको हमने base ले लिया. And then height will be the perpendicular distance of the third point of the third vertex from this base. Third point कौन सा? Third point is this point C here. C का distance from the base, but we're talking about perpendicular distance. Perpendicular distance कैसे लेंगे? ये आपका perpendicular distance होगा. And once, since you have this drawn on a Cartesian plane, your distance find करना is pretty easy. It's just the horizontal distance, right? तो आप इन दोनों चीजों को find कर सकते हो. अब base आपके पास क्या आ जाएगी? You see, this is 10, this is 2. So your distance कितना हो गया? 10 minus 2, that is 8. That's your base here. Similarly, the height. So this is going to be the height. जो perpendicular distance हमने देखा है, ये आपकी height बन गई. Base से perpendicular distance to the third point. This is your height, even though it lies outside the triangle. क्योंकि हमने perpendicular लेना था उस point से base तक, तो base here. So how do you calculate this height? You've got this x coordinate -4 here. You've got this x coordinate 12 here. 12 minus -4. Total distance kitna ban gaya? It becomes 16. So 16 is going to be your height. You just input values there in the formula, half into base into height, and you get your area from that. Okay, so that's going to be the case. That's going to be you're going to encounter most often. So what you do here is, if there's any side that is either horizontal or vertical, you're going to take that as the base. Okay, and then height will be the perpendicular distance of the space from the third vertex that you have. In this case, the third vertex was this point C here. Okay, so now sometimes it is possible, or even in this case, if you wanted, you can use another formula. जब आपके पास इस तरह से आपको समझ नहीं आ रही हो कि कौन सी हाइट लेनी है, कौन सी बेस लेनी है, if you are confused about that, or you cannot find a side that is vertical or horizontal, या आपको सिर्फ coordinates पता है, आप उसको sketch नहीं करना चाह रहे, आप सिर्फ coordinates को use करके area of a figure find कर सकते हो. So if you have any shape and you have the coordinates of that shape given, you've got this formula for area that looks like this. So basically what you do is you write down, so I'm just going to erase some part of this. What you do is you write down the coordinates like this. You say x1, y1, x2, y2, x3, y3, right? जितने भी आपके वो coordinates हैं. It works for quadrilaterals as well, pentagons as well. आप जितने मर्जी vertices हो, the idea remains the same. आपने सारे vertices को रखा इस तरह से, x1, y1, x2, y2, x3, y3, and then finally at the end, what you do is the last in the last column, you are going to repeat the first coordinate again, right? वो सारे coordinates लिख के end पे आपने पहला वाला coordinate repeat कर देना है, ठीक है? And then what you do is you go this way: x1 into y2 plus x2 into y3 plus x3 into y1. That's what you have here. So outside, by the way, we've got this 1/2. 1/2 बाहर multiply हो रहा होता है. अंदर हमारे पास ये है, and we have this modulus sign, ताकि जो भी अंदर हो उसको पॉजिटिव कर दें. हम कभी-कभी नेगेटिव आ जाता है, we have to make that positive. हम क्या करेंगे, हम इस तरह से कोऑर्डिनेट्स को लिखा x1 y1, x2 y2, x3 y3, and then finally at the end we repeat x1 y1, and then what we do is diagonally आपने इनको multiply करना है, x1 y2 plus x2 y3 plus x3 y1. You add all of them up, and then look at the other diagonals in the other direction. x2 y1, x3 y2, x1 y3. You're going to subtract them from this. So that's x2 y1 plus x3 y2 plus x1 y3. You subtract them from this green part. आपने उसको subtract किया. You just input values now. जो ऊपर coordinates थे, आपने उनको कह दिया एक order में रखना है इसको. So for example, triangle method doesn't make any difference because you can choose any order. But for other quadrilaterals, you have to go either anti-clockwise or clockwise. So let's say you've had, in fact, you've got the figure there already ऊपर. आपको नजर आ रहा है ABC, right? आपने बस उनके coordinates, so किसी को भी आपने x1 y1 कह दिया, किसी को भी x2 y2 कह दिया, third को आपने x3 y3 कह दिया. Going either in anti-clockwise direction or in clockwise direction, किसी भी एक order के अंदर कर लें. आपने उनको mark कर दिया. Just input values in the formula. You evaluate this. If the number inside this modulus turns out to be negative, when you evaluate everything, आपने उसको बस positive कर देना. That's what these vertical lines are for. In vertical lines का मतलब ये है कि अगर आपको पसंद है कोई negative number आ रहा है, उसको आपने positive कर देना. Right? That's how this formula works. You evaluate this, you get the same result that you got before. And that's 64. Now it's much longer. Half into base into height is much quicker, so that should be your first go-to method. If you're able to figure this out, that should be the first go-to method for you. आपने देखना है कि आप directly half into base into height कैसे लगा सकते हो. If you can't figure that out, in that case, you can you can use this other formula if you want. That's how you find the area of a triangle when you know its coordinates. The last thing, angle between lines. Okay, how do you find angle between a line and the x-axis? You've got this formula for that. That is tan theta equals gradient. Okay, there's a reason for this. We discussed that in our class, but that's the result that we have at the end. Tan theta equals gradient. इसमें theta का represent कर रहा है. Theta is representing angle between the line and the x-axis. So if you have a line, let's say you've got this red line here, and you want to find the angle between that line and the x-axis, which is represented by this theta here. आप theta की value find कर सकते हो using this formula tan theta equals gradient. So let's take an example. Let's say you've got this line, gradient उसका 1/2 है. आपने क्या कहा tan theta equals 1/2 और आपके पास theta की value आ गई. Theta is 26.6 degrees. If the gradient is negative, it works exactly the same way. Tan theta equals gradient. आपके पास right side पे negative number आ रहा होगा. When you evaluate this on your calculator, you'll get something negative. What that means is, if you remember trigonometry, negative angle है, it's just giving you this clockwise angle here. So x-axis से आपको एक clockwise दे रहा है 71.6 degrees, but it doesn't make any difference. आप क्या कहोगे? The angle. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah. So even if it turns out to be negative at the end, it doesn't make any difference. All you have to do is it's clockwise or anti-clockwise, it's the same angle, right? So angle between the line and the x-axis, this is 71.6 degrees in this case. अच्छा, कभी-कभी आपसे कहेगा मुझे obtuse angle चाहिए. So remember, angle between two lines can either be acute or obtuse. आप दोनों तरह से देख सकते हो. If you look at this angle, this is 71.6 degrees. If I want to look at the other angle, that will be 180 minus 71.6 degrees. It doesn't make any difference. तो अगर वो आपसे obtuse angle मांगता है, आपने 180 में से माइनस करके वो obtuse angle दे देना. अगर से acute angle मांगता है, आपने वो directly वही angle दे देना that you found from your calculator. Okay, so that's how you find angle between a line and the x-axis. A lot of times you're asked to find angle between two lines. दो lines के दरमियान में angle find करना. For instance, you've got two lines. One line has gradient 2, the other line has gradient 1/2. इनके दरमियान में angle find करना है. One idea is that you just find the angles that these lines make with the x-axis. तो आप यहाँ पे θ1 find कर लें, θ2 find कर लें. These are the angles that these lines make with the x-axis, right? आपने दोनों angles figure out कर लिया. Using their gradients, tan θ1 equals 1/2. That gives you 26.56 degrees. Tan θ2 equals 2. That gives you 63.43 degrees. And then you just subtract both of them, and that will give you the angle between those two lines, which is highlighted here. That's the angle theta here. आप इनको subtract कर लेंगे, and you get this from there. 63.43 minus 26.56, and that gives you 36.87 degrees here. That's the angle between those two lines. That's the value of theta. ठीक है, दोनों का x-axis angle find करके उनका difference find करके. Okay. अच्छा, sometimes it can also happen that one of these lines has a positive gradient and the other has a negative gradient. It works the same way there. आपने क्या करना है, दोनों का अलग-अलग angle निकाल लिया. The key here is you keep the negative sign as it is. You don't change it at this point. एक का negative आ रहा होगा angle, एक का positive आ रहा होगा. You just subtract both of them. But when you do the subtraction, वो negative sign आपने वैसे ही रखना है वहां पे, तो ये minus plus हो जाएगा. So the angle that you end up getting in this case is 98.1 degrees. यहाँ के पास 98.1 degrees आ रहा है. Why? Because एक angle positive आ रहा था ऊपर वाला, नीचे वाला angle negative आ रहा था. उन दोनों को हमने add कर लिया, so it became the angle between the lines came out to be 98.1 degrees. ये हमें obtuse angle मिल रहा है यहाँ से. अगर उसने acute पूछा होता, हम इसको 180 में से इसको minus कर देते, we'll get the corresponding acute angle from that, right? So that's one idea that you can use to find angles between any two lines. There's also a direct formula for this, if you can remember that. Tan theta equals gradient is relatively easier to remember, so you can just find the angle of both lines separately with the x-axis and go subtract कर सकते हैं. If you can memorize a formula, this is the direct formula that we have for this, to find the angle between any two lines. अब यहाँ पे जो theta है, this represents the angle between lines. Okay, And you can use this formula directly to find angle between two lines. Now, tan theta equals m1 minus m2 divided by 1 plus m1 into m2. Okay, where theta represents angle between any two lines. Again, m1 is the gradient of one of those two lines, m2 is the gradient of the other line. आपने क्या करना है, सिर्फ उसके अंदर values input करनी है, m1 और m2 की, you'll get something at the end, you take inverse, tan inverse, and you'll get the corresponding angle. Again, negative भी आ रहा होगा, आपने उसको positive कर देना है end के ऊपर, because वो clockwise हो या anti-clockwise हो, that's not our concern here at the moment. तो आप इसको positive कर दोगे, you get the angle between those two lines. Okay. And that's pretty much it. So these are all the concepts that you need to know for P1 coordinate geometry. We will cover equation of circle in another video. That's it for now. I'll see you again in another video. Allah Hafiz.